Thanks once again for tuning in. I'm Frank, your host, and you are listening to Empire's podcast, The Ottomans. If you are new to Empires, I thank you for stopping by, and if you are a returning listener, many thanks as well. There's not much in the way of announcements, so let's jump right in. Something Ottoman This Way Comes, Episode 3. We left the Ottomans off in Episode 2 after the city of Izmit fell to the Turks. Sitting in camp with the Sultan just outside Izmir was the Byzantine Emperor Andronicus III. And yes, you heard that right, for those of you keeping score. I said Andronicus III and not the second. It seems as though I stumbled in Episode 2 by identifying him as Andronicus II. And believe me, I am sorry about it, but there's going to be future stumbles, I'm sure. After all, with the coming Byzantine civil wars, I found it difficult to keep the players straight in this game of musical chairs, this made up of pretenders, child emperors, claims, and counterclaims. So, to set the record straight, Emperor Andronicus II reigned from 1284 to 1328, and now Andronicus III took over in 1329, and he would later die from malaria in 1341, and it was he who was present at the Battle of Pelucanum that I covered in Episode 2. It's important that we mention Andronicus III as well, because apart from him agreeing to pay the Sultan tribute after he died in 1341, that is Andronicus left the Byzantine Empire in something of a lurch. His son and chosen successor, a mere 9-year-old boy, was protected by the imperial regent, you guessed it, John Cantazuzene. You see, I told you we'd run across John again. As you can imagine, being ruled over by a regent representing a 9-year-old boy, well, this garnered much anger in the extended members of the imperial family. Not only that, but in the far-flung and disjointed provinces of the Byzantine Empire, governors and generals were entertaining flights of fancy that they too could achieve independence from Constantinople or make a play at becoming emperor themselves. Thus, what we see are major flare-ups and rebellions and coups launched from both the imperial capital and the lands beyond, such as Serbia, Bulgaria, and even the Kingdom of Hungary was seeking to press their interests. And I plan on doing a brief bio on John Cantazuzene in upcoming Episode 4. So we'll definitely be hearing more from him. The Ottomans, meanwhile, after their treaty was sealed with loads of gold with the Byzantines, they sat back and watched all of the changing diplomatic and military situation unfolding in the Balkan side of the Straits. Sultan Orhan is responsible for the development of what would evolve to become one of the Ottomans' greatest weapons in the future, a vast intelligent network formed around disgruntled soldiers, corrupt officials, and plain old boots-on-the-ground human assets. This network would grow under future sultans to eventually penetrate every major European court in Europe. This allowed the Ottomans access to their enemies' military secrets, economic systems, and advantages that they would relentlessly press upon the battlefield. The European armies were often surprised and then horrified to find Ottoman deployments exactly staged so as to exploit their logistical weak points. On the battlefield itself, the Ottomans enjoyed superb intelligence, down to the individual unit commanders facing them in the Christian armies. Sultan Orhan realized that after the fall of Izmit, his best bet would be to simply sit and wait and watch and send in his spies. After Izmit fell, the Ottomans began to slowly infiltrate their enemies. by way of offering military support and money to one faction or another in the targeted province. By the time the rebel leader or pretender had defeated his enemies, he had the Ottoman Sultan to thank for his possession and newfound success, as well as thousands of Ottoman troops deployed inside his province. When the smoke cleared, it was often too late for the usurper or rebel to realize fully the bitter fruits of his Ottoman alliance, with thousands of alien troops, new fortresses being constructed, and a demand of tribute by the Sultan. Direct annexation into the Ottoman Empire was often only a few years away and resulted in little resistance from the weakened and occupied host nation. Sultan Orhan, between 1340 and 1345, after the fall of Izmit, would go on to employ this strategy to win a string of bloodless victories for the Ottoman Empire and add much territory in Anatolia. Speaking of the sidelines, as the Byzantines sank knee-deep into the muck that was their own self-destructive civil wars, Orhan watched these developments closely. It wasn't long before John Cantazuzene, whom history will remember as Emperor John V, if that tells you anything, spoiler alert, was locked in a life-and-death struggle with his political opponents. And John Cantazuzene reached out to the Sultan and requested assistance in the mid-1340s. Sultan Orhan, who had proved himself to be a shrewd statesman, demanded Cantazuzene's daughter, who was a Byzantine princess named Theodora, in marriage in return for military and financial aid. This event is important in the history of the Ottoman Empire, because while on the surface it boosted the prestige of the House of Osman, on a deeper level it helped tie the Ottoman legacy to the Eastern Romans. On the political front, future sultans could point to an illustrious pedigree that was derived from the ancient Romans themselves. On the military front, Sultan Orhan now had ample justification to interfere with the internal happenings of not only the Byzantine Empire, but the surrounding kingdoms and states as well. The ceremony of marriage between Orhan and Theodora was conducted in 1346, in what multiple sources describe in an elaborate service. Edward Gibbon's Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire, well, I'll let him describe the event. Quote, Theodora ascended a throne, which was surrounded with curtains of silk and gold. The troops were under arms, but the emperor was alone on horseback. At a signal, the curtains were suddenly withdrawn to disclose the bride or victim, encircled by kneeling eunuchs and torches. The sound of flutes and trumpets proclaimed the song, which was chanted by such poets as the age could produce. Without the rites of the church, Theodora was delivered to her barbarous lord. But it had been stipulated that she should preserve her religion in the Harum and Bersha, and her father celebrated her charity and devotion in this ambitious situation. End quote. Hence the Ottomans entered Europe, not by storming onto the historical stage in a fiery cloud of chaos and destruction, as did the Mongols, but a gradual process of infiltration. There is no fixed date when the very first troop contingent arrived to assist Cantazuzene, but Sultan Orhan did send him men, and they fought at a place called Demotika, located in the middle of Thrace, a province of Byzantine, which is now a part of modern-day Greece. The chess pieces for the upcoming battle were first moved in the year 1352, when John Palaiologos, a pretender in the never-ending conveyor belt of imperial civil wars, entered the Byzantine province of Thrace with a cavalry force of some 6,000 knights, most of whom were Serbians, and he was intent on trapping Cantazuzene along with his Ottoman allies via a massive encirclement movement. The battle itself would prove a strange matchup, given that no actual real Byzantine troops were present for the battle, yet the results would have lasting and ultimately fatal consequences for the Byzantines. John Palaiologos appeared to have intended a surprise attack. However, as contemporary observers noted, the Ottomans were never truly caught off guard, with all their spies and scouts spread out over the country. Cantazuzene managed to muster a handful of mercenaries, and after a desperate plea, he was happy to see 10,000 Ottoman cavalrymen arrive right in the nick of time. This Ottoman cavalry force met the Serbian units head-on. Though the details of this battle are murky, it appears that at some point the Ottoman cavalry were successful in turning one of the flanks of the Serbian army and pushing forward to cut off their retreat. The center of the enemy line broke, and all told the Serbians lost over 4,000 men killed. In researching the battle, I found that most of those killed were executed after having been captured. I could find no explanation as to why they weren't taken prisoner and then ransomed, as so often happened in these cases. At any rate, the Ottomans were victorious in assisting their ally, and this would become their first ever battle on European soil. This European defeat would prove a rude wake-up call to the Serbian leader, Stefan Dušan, who harbored ambitions to create a Serbian empire upon the bones of the Byzantines, but more on Dušan later. In 1353, the eldest of Sultan Orhan's sons, Suleiman Pasha, crossed the famed Greek Hellespont with a contingent of Ottoman troops, meant to further reinforce Cantazuzene's position in Constantinople. Shortly after arriving on the Gallipoli peninsula, the universe smiled on the Ottomans when a sudden and destructive earthquake struck the region, causing the walls of the Gallipoli fortress to come crashing down. Not letting this good stroke of fortune pass on by, Suleiman on his own initiative went to work occupying and then rebuilding the walls as fast as he possibly could, and in the process delivered to his dear old dad, Sultan Orhan, a massive, and I do mean massive, strategic gift. There is a reason the Turkish Straits are called Turkish Straits to this day. With the occupation of Gallipoli, the Ottomans now controlled the ships sailing into the Dardanelles Straits. In effect, they could cut Constantinople off from the rest of Europe. By late 1354, the Ottomans had, and were in control now, not only of the peninsula of Thrace or Gallipoli itself, but of the surrounding countryside. News of Gallipoli falling to the Ottomans opened the floodgates from Anatolia, and vast numbers of Turkic horsemen and settlers soon poured into Europe via the straits. Whereas before the Ottomans had crossed into Europe in small bands of mercenaries, looting here and there, fighting some and then going home, they now brought with them women, children, and settlers who were intent on never leaving and instead wanted to form a permanent presence. After Sultan Orhan solidified his control over much of Thrace, the common peoples upon whose backs empires are built, those of peasants, workers, artisans, farmers, and Muslim religious clerics and mystics, flooded into the towns and provinces within the newly begotten Thrace. But what of the poor folk already living in Thrace? How did they feel about the hordes of Turkish men, women, children, and farm animals that were now streaming into their country? Well, it was a mixed bag depending on who you were. If you were a Christian lord, part of that upper class of society, then this could be a calamity, involving the loss of your house or castle, lands, income, and you could be doomed to either the oppressive poverty of the landless gentry, which was a growing class under the Ottomans, or you could turncoat, defect, convert to Islam, and offer your services to the Sultan and prayed he had a job for you. If you were a member of the Orthodox clergy, then you could say goodbye to the prime agricultural land occupied by the numerous monasteries and churches. The special privileges enjoyed by the Orthodox Church were suspended, as the peasantry and merchants no longer were forced to pay the church tax, which I would like to say was quite high. I remember it said in one of my history classes in college that medieval Europe was divided up into those who fight, those who pray, and those who work. If you found yourself at the top of this pyramid, then life under the Ottomans could be unforgiving and harsh. However, it was a different story for those who worked, the peasants. The very last thing the Sultan wanted were numerous Christian peasants taking to the hills and bearing arms against their Ottoman overlords. This could be bad for business in the long term. Luckily for the peasants and farmers, the Turks didn't have the stern mind to farm the land and take everyone's job. But rather, these new Turkish populations stuck close to the towns, formed new villages, and manned the fortresses, and they were intent on picking up various trades. It seemed like the Turks preferred to leave the farming and the labors to the Christians. So, to sum up, if you were a commoner, here was the bare-bones deal after an Ottoman conquest. First, your taxes were cut by close to 90%. Second, the Orthodox Church no longer hoarded the most agricultural rich lands, so that it could suck the lifeblood out of the productivity. Instead, these lands were redistributed to Turkish lords, who would later form the core of the Ottoman cavalry, the sapiha, and the lands were leased out to the poor, landless peasants who worked them for pay and profit. Third, mandatory free labor in the service of the local Byzantine lord was banned under the Sultan. Fourth, the Ottomans didn't care one whit what religion you were. They only seemed to care if Balkan peasants wanted to enlist in the Ottoman army, or if the rich landed gentry wanted to send their sons to the Ottoman schools in Anatolia. Other than that, they left people alone. Thus it was the former subjects of the Byzantine Empire came to view the Ottomans not as oppressors, and really maybe liberator might be too strong a word, but they certainly were no worse for the wear during this time. After the Gallipoli takeover in the 1350s, special bands of Ottoman, semi-permanent, semi-professional raiders called akinci would ransack, raid, pillage, loot, kidnap, enslave, and generally spread havoc all over the way from the north of Thrace and to a city about 100 miles north of Constantinople called Adrianople. So Sultan Orhan enriched himself as the kings, lords, and despots in the surrounding countryside paid homage to these new Ottomans in an effort to keep the terrifying akinci warriors out of their lands. We will have more to say on the subject of the akinci later, but you can go on ahead and speed up because I have an extra special episode on the akinci, so you can just scroll on up and check it out. I hope you will join me next time as we get more into battles and conquest. Believe me, things are going to be getting very interesting under the next Ottoman Sultan, Murad I. Thanks for listening.